Gino, consciousness and God are two subjects that elicit high emotion. And sometimes people in consciousness talk about God, sometimes people in God talk about consciousness, but it's actually not that frequent. The two seem to be separate kinds of conversations. How do you look at it? How do you frame the concept of God as it's expressed in all different cultures and a deep understanding of consciousness?
Well, consciousness is the awareness of all of this. The material world we call cosmos. But the question is, how does all of this happen, and how was all of this created, and what's happening here? And a lot of people could use the term God to describe that. So
To describe what? What are you describing God as?
That which created all of this and moves all of this.
Okay.
From my perspective.
Okay. Because some people would say God is all of that. That's a pantheistic view. But some people say God created all that. That's a more traditional theistic point of view. Okay. Right.
So if we talk about the experience of this moment right now, I'm having a conversation with you. And one way we can frame it in the realm of thought and in the realm of story is I'm here at this conference. You're here at this conference and we're having a conversation, and I live in Hong Kong, you live everywhere, and here we are right now. Right. And it was these circumstances that brought us together, and we can have story around this. Another way of framing the experience of this moment right now is I'm actually sitting here in front of you, you're sitting here in front of me, and I can see you and the fountain and all the beautiful surroundings that we're at, and you can see the beautiful surroundings. And there's you and me that are having this conversation here. But now there's the slight sound of an airplane going by, the sound of a truck going by, maybe a person walking by, etc. All of these things, when I'm talking, the intention is clearly from me. And when you're talking, the intention is clearly from you. But all of this other stuff that's happening, how is all of this happening? And who is enabling all of this? Now, we can talk about it in the realm of story, but from our direct experience phenomenological perspective, it's just kind of happening.
It's happening. I mean, when you say who is making this happen, I mean, that's a arbitrary comment. There doesn't have to be anybody making it happen. It's just there.
Well, right now, there's me and there's you, right?
Right.
And I seem to have agency from me, and you seem to have agency. You're nodding your head, and if I ask you to stop nodding, you can.
Yeah, no, I can be very responsive.
So we seem to have agency, but then all of this other stuff that's happening also seems to have some kind of agency, or things start and stop, and they're not intended from me, and they're not intended from you.
Okay, so we exist in an environment.
Yeah. And if we want to look at this, and we can tie it into story again. But then below the story, from an experiential perspective, I see you, and I'm aware of this. And I'm having a conversation with you, and you see me, and you're aware of all of this, and you also have some agency to have a conversation. So I'll grant that you and I exist, but all of this other stuff that's here seems to exist and seems to do things.
Right.
And we can tie it to story. But then from our perspective, the agency, we can attribute it to other things. But from the context of this conversation, it seems to be happening as we're talking. So there was a cawing of some birds.
Yeah, I understand all that, but where does God come into that? Or where do you get anything beyond just the physical environment?
Well, there is the physical environment, but again, and we know how things happen, but if we start inquiring into why in its relationship to our conversation, things that then start becoming very interesting. So if you look at coincidence, synchronicity, and things that just seem to happen, and you probably know in your line of work, there are certain things that you try to do, and no matter how hard you try, it doesn't seem to happen, although it should happen, but other things seem to happen fairly effortlessly. And so how do things happen? And so from a framing perspective, there's me, I'm trying to do something, and then the reality, which I don't know, you can call it nature, you can tie it to story, and you can segment it into stories and object, but it just seems to respond in relation to the intention that I might have.
What follows from that? What do you learn about the underlying cause of the universe, or some sort of a spiritual or God? I mean, is there anything to learn from that? It doesn't seem like there's anything to learn.
Well, the learning perspective is, again, in the realm of the mind. And to really know God, and this we can go into original sin if you like, it's really to to surrender. To surrender. And the interesting thing and the beautiful thing about interrelationship is in conversation, the question is, I seem to have a condition, I seem to have a worldview. So there are emotions attached to certain ideas that I may have, emotions
Yeah,
attached that you may have. And so the question is, can I surrender to you and and
But
and resonate with you?
why do you need these other factors? Why isn't just the superficial thing that's occurring the reality?
Well, it is the reality, but like poetry, it's like if I read a prose of poetry, why do there have to be other meanings? Why can't I just take it for the meaning that at face value? And if you do that, you're missing a lot of the wonder and joy and beauty of life.
But do you see in that wonder and joy and beauty of life and in the interacting conversation, do you see something, the hint of something more? Do you see the hint of some spiritual or God existent? Because
yes, it's the grace of God. All of
well,
this.
you're just now defining it. I mean, I would like that to be the case, but I don't see a whit of evidence that you've just given me why it is. You give me this very nice understanding of how you and I are talking together. I follow all that. Well, then you say it's the grace of God. Why did you say that? You could have said it's the grace of the grass.
Well, you could, but the way I framed it right now, again, there's you and me, and there's that from my So there are three levels of frame we're looking at. One is the story, and we can tie it into story from separation. We've got this whole relationship of all of these things synchronistically that are happening in the context of our conversation. So as things are showing up, if we treat this arguably as God, laying commentary.
What's this? What you said, treat this as God. What's the this?
This plane going by, the sound that's going by.
Treat that as God? Or you're saying that is the creation, or the God created the whole...
Yeah, and it is now happening, and it seems to have relation to our conversation.
Okay, well...
It could.
What has relation to our conversation is everything that impinges on us from the external environment. Whether that has any relationship to God is a totally separate issue. You've given me nothing, zero, to relate God to this conversation. It's an interesting conversation, but then every once in a while the word God comes in, it doesn't mean anything.
Well, the key question is...
What does it mean?
Well, the key question is how and why is all of this happening? How and why is all of this happening? Almost on cue. You probably, thank you. Things just seem to happen in a different way. If you start opening, rather than looking at the words as just the text face, and if you start observing and reading into and feeling into it, and observing in rather than just the rational intellectual way, you can still look at it. So like, for example, the bells that just went off. How does that happen? And clearly, in the context of our conversation, it seemed to...
Well, it was very nice, but there's an infinite number of coincidences that could occur or do occur that have no meaning whatsoever.
Yeah. So it's about reframing it. So I could frame it in terms of story and just treat everything as noise and just assuming that I, quote, know, but it's an intellectual kind of knowing. But then the interesting thing that comes from the knowing is the emergence of things like the bell that just happened, this wind that's blowing, the cars that are going by, and all of these things.
What does that have to do with God, though?
How is it happening?
It's happening. Why do you need God? Why do you have to name something God?
Well, God is just a word, right? God is a word.
Well, what is your word for God? In that, if God is defined as the bells and the wind and this and that, what then is God?
Well, there's
is it just another word for everything? It's just a way of defining everything with a simple word?
Well, it's a way of exploring and reframing the context of what a conversation or what we're doing and what I'm doing. And so typically, if you look today, especially with technology, people are on their phones and they're on their computers, and clearly they're in their mind and they're acting from their mind. And we've done these exercises that I've done with you, being present versus being in thought. And so if you're looking at things from the mind, clearly all of those actions and my role and my physiology is going to be tied to my intention in my story. But if I can open up and just be aware and have the conversation with you, but then be grounded in the presence of the birds that just cawed again and all of the subtle things that are going on, life just takes on a whole nother dimension of mystery and wonder and possibility. And ultimately, the challenge for this and your challenge for understanding consciousness is it's really about letting the mind go and embrace and living. versus being versus thinking. And trying to understand. And if you look at this and you live from this and you smell the air and there's the wonderful sunlight that we have right now and the joy. And if joy is the force that's motivating the action, your results are going to be very different than acting from fear, need, or desire, which come from time pressure and these other things that arise. And so for you, if you talk about looking at things in terms of your framing, you're in a sense dancing to your own music. The fact that I have my worldview and things are just happening and showing up in synchronistic or non-synchronistic ways, it's in a sense, the feeling of it and the quality of it is like music. And so the question is, can you dance? And from dancing also comes joy and gratitude and wonder. And so it provides the music, how things just emerge that's not intended by me and you. Even the sound of this motorcycle that's going by is part of the music of life. And the question is, how are you dancing with it? Are you just listening to your own thing, or are you really open and exploring and embracing that which has created this? A third level, so I've talked about the story, the level of you and me having a conversation. A third level of this reframing is that from my perspective, I actually see you and I see all of the things that are here. And I actually see my body. And from an experiential perspective, I just have an awareness of this body, but how this body moves, and actually I have these long hairs that grow here and things that happen and spots on your hand and these kind of things that just happen, they're not my intention either. So even, I'd even argue that all of the things that are happening within my body and which I seem to be doing are actually because of the will of God. And what I mean by the will of God is because there is some will that's coming through that's allowing it to happen. And so from my perspective and my emotions and all this other stuff, I may have some intention. There's that which I think is me, engaging that which I think is not me, or which doesn't seem to be me, even including my physical body, accidents, these kind of things. And so it's really a dance, when we're talking about the music and the dance again, it's like, what are the intentions that are motivating the action and how is the reality responding? And that's a relationship, a direct, intimate relationship you have with God.